What's up, everybody? It's your favorite judge's favorite nerd, and today we are going to talk about the best and worst of the Transformers brand and third party, so to speak, of 2019. I have a lot to say about this list, but I'm going to save most of it for the final thoughts. I wanted to open with this as an honorable mention, because this is one of the most meaningful pieces I received this year, just because it was created in somebody's basement and in somebody's head, and they sort of saw it through to fruition and then gifted to me. It's a very meaningful piece to me, and I received it this year, so I wanted to include it in today's video in some regard and have something for you guys to see while we got the introduction stuff out of the way. So, you know the vibes. We do most disappointing figures of the year. We do most surprisingly good figures of the year. We do the worst figures of the year and the best figures of the year. And for the sake of this list, I have to have this list be compiled by not only figures in my collection, but figures I had the opportunity to look at throughout the year. Usually I just make the list based on my purchases. I can't do it this year because I didn't buy enough Transformers to kind of check all those boxes appropriately. Like, I bought enough to make a list, but like worst and stuff like that would be very challenging because I didn't buy that many bad ones this year. So we're gonna go through it. It's very interesting to me. But let's start on a bad foot so we can end on a good foot with most disappointing figures of the year. Coming in at number 5 for most disappointing is DX9's Wild Rider. Now, I want to go ahead and make it clear, just because they're disappointing doesn't mean that they're bad. It just means that they're disappointing. This is disappointing to me because I like their breakdown so much. There was just a few engineering issues in regards to tolerance of joints, and if they would have tightened that up with this release, they'd have been fine. But then this release came. It has joints just as loose. It also has the bobblehead effect. And then the unsightliness of just how skinny that thing is. But that's definitely more subjective. But yeah, it just, they were on a roll. They could have made something good, perfect. But instead what we got was something that was good. And then we got something that was a little less than good. Still a quality figure, just disappointing. Next would be X-Transbot's drag strip. Once again, pretty good figure. Problem is, it came in a line that had some pretty great figures. And all of a sudden you get this one, which seems like it's not really part of the same conglomerate. It's not as clean. The engineering isn't as fun or as intuitive. It's clunky, and it just doesn't have the refinement that the other ones had, which is disappointing when 3 out of 4 have been pretty great. And that's why this guy makes the list. But luckily, for me, they're the only figures in my collection that I'm putting on the disappointing list for the year. So let's continue. My number 3 is Beast Wars Megatron, the masterpiece. Once again, not a bad figure, but this figure lacked the sophistication and engineering that I expect from Takara. The dinosaur mode lacked a lot of the fun elements that would make it enjoyable to mess around with in dinosaur mode, and had they kind of gotten their heads around that, they could have had arguably one of the most enjoyable figures in the entire line on their hands. You add that with the tremendous amount of stress marks that I had on the one that I had the opportunity to look at, with a lack of flight stand juxtaposed against the price point, and all of those elements just begin to make a pretty disappointing release. Still a quality figure, just disappointing. And we'll go ahead and stay on the topic of Megatron here for a bit. The Siege Megatron. Now, it's Siege, it's mainline, and the expectation shouldn't be super high, but being as though most of the figures that I looked at in this line were surprisingly good, and certainly in regard to my expectations, this one seemed a little less than. Sure, it still had the sloppy space mud, but it also had more hollowness, visible hollowness that is, in odd proportions, which is something that I feel like the rest of the line kind of got right, which is what makes me add it to the disappointing list. Not the worst thing in the world, but disappointing. But my number 1 is a bit of an odd choice. It's Planet X Starsaber. And the reason why is because I like Planet X a lot. Unfortunately, they never really made anything that I want to collect, but I was really hoping that they would. And after I had the opportunity to mess with their Deathsaurus that was gifted to me, generous, but they shouldn't have, I then had high expectations for the Starsaber. But they got certain things wrong on the Starsaber that I just don't expect from this company. Planet X has a way of making extremely accurate sculpts. It's one of their strong suits. They're kind of a sleeper company because they don't make G1 stuff. But what they do make are super accurate sculpts of characters from franchises within Transformers that don't have a lot of competition and thus don't have a lot of options for collectors. But the sculpt mistakes that they made on the head of this thing to me are just unforgivable. And if it was some new company that was fresh out of the gate, I could let it go. But because they usually get this sort of stuff super right, I found it disappointing. And there you have it. And luckily I dodged 3 out of the 5 bullets, but to be fair, it's not as though they're really bullets, right? They're just figures that didn't perform up to the level of expectations that I have come to expect in regard to these companies. Star Saber, the Beast Wars Megs specifically, are both figures that definitely most would be happy to have and content with. There's just a few glaring issues with them that make them slightly disappointing to me. So overall, when you get figures on this level of quality pretty much across the board, and they make your disappointing list, it's kind of a blessing in disguise, because it means it's been a pretty good year. And now we'll move on to the most surprisingly good list. And once again, to be fair, it's pretty much in the same pocket. That is to say, it doesn't mean that they're great figures. It just means that they exceeded expectations. Some could also be great, but it doesn't inherently mean so. And we'll start off here with number 5 on the list, which is 3AB. And I say that because I know they make some good stuff, but I also have messed with some of their stuff that's not so great. And when I got the opportunity to mess with this B, I was like, wow, this really steps up and gets into a higher echelon of pocket in regard to collectibles that I didn't think they would be able to do at this price point, and they did. Tons of accessories, all of them are appropriate, great sculpt, great paint, great articulation, solid materials, etc., etc. All at a very affordable price. And I know they have the capability, but like I said, I also have experience with them not doing as such. So the fact that they knocked this one out of the park definitely gets surprisingly good for me, just because of the level of how good it was. Number 4, Mastermind Creations Ocular Max Vortex. And I don't think this is a phenomenal figure, but it's solid enough. But what blew my mind is just how much I found myself running back to it to kind of manipulate the pose or alter the pose or kind of mess with him a bit, put him in different places within the shelf that he was in, because I was just drawn to him in some capacity. There's something about this figure that keeps bringing me back to him, which I didn't notice in the pictures, I didn't see or get the vibe from even within the review, but as he sat on my shelf, as he continued to be kind of a part of my collection, I found myself over and over again manipulating him, posing him, messing with him, etc., so to speak. And I didn't see that coming, not from a mile away, and that's why he made the list of most surprisingly good. Now these next 2, I don't really care what order you put them in. I don't care if you put Magic Square at number 3 and Transform Element at number 2 or vice versa. But they were both surprisingly good to me. Let me explain why. For Magic Square, this is a company that made a name for itself carving out a pocket within the Legends scale. And the big question was, how would that translate into a Masterpiece scale? And the answer is surprisingly well. Do I have issues with it? Of course. But I never expected this level of quality in terms of build and engineering especially, but also in regard to sculpt at this scale from this company. And that's what puts it in that place for me. As for the Transform Element, different set of circumstances. Transform Element is widely considered to have come from the Black Mamba KO company, and from a company that wasn't creating original molds or original engineering, taking a leap at a figure that not only is a flagship character, but for this specific mold required a ton of engineering that was original, unique, and independent from anything else. They knocked it out of the park, along with good sculpt work, paint, etc. for what they were going for. So both of these figures make my most surprisingly good list for different reasons. I can't tell you which one is more surprising, but they both deserve a spot here. And my number 1 choice for most surprisingly good is the Final Victory 3 Mighty Warriors set. I saw these things and the dummies jumped off the leash to rip these things apart. But when we got the price point, it started to put things in a different perspective. And then when I had the opportunity to look at the figures, the truth is they're not good. And I still don't recommend them, honestly. However, they're not trash. In fact, they're far from it. And at the price point, with 3 different figures released in one set, they had every right in the world to be trash. And they weren't. They were fine. But everything leading up to their release suggests that they shouldn't be, that they wouldn't be, and that they couldn't be. And they were. So they make my number 1 choice for most surprisingly good figures of the year. Far from great, but far from as terrible as they should have been. And there you have it. 5 figures with different levels of quality, different levels of engineering, different levels of substance really, but all of them exceeded my expectations, exceeded their reputations, and exceeded whatever standard I think that I had set upon them prior to having the opportunity to review the pieces. Now let's head on down the dark alley, shall we? Moving on to the worst figures of the year category. This was actually pretty challenging this year because I don't know if I looked at anything that was absolutely terrible. They're kind of varying degrees of bad, but nothing that was just absolute dog shit. So let us begin with number 5, TFC Center Twin. And honestly, this probably wouldn't make the list if it didn't have as many stress marks on it as I found with it. The problem with this is that it's good for a standard that was set a year ago, but that most third-party companies exceeded 2 to 3 years ago. And as a result, we get a kind of decent for yesterday's figure priced in today's market competitively at a quality that's not up to par with the standard of today, thus making this one of the worst figures I looked at in 2019. Numero cuatro. And to be fair, I went back and forth on this over and over and over again as to whether or not this was number 1 of my most disappointing or number 4 of my worst figures of the year. But I ended up at number 4. And the reason why mainly has to do with the price point they're set at. Nickel is kind of fine, right? She's actually not the issue here. The issue with me and Nickel is that I don't much care for her character. I love the pet and really wanted the pet, but the pet is actually the one that's not very good. However, when you take all of those components and you set it at the price point that these two were released at, it makes me want to hit my hand with a hammer repeatedly. A spiked hammer. I don't even know if that's a thing, but make it a thing and then hit my hand with it is how it feels at this price point. These don't feel like high quality figures, but the price point feels like it should be out of this world. Add to that the kind of clunky, clumsy nature of the pet and the fact that they both were released before the other 2 members of the DJD, which most people actually kind of want. And yeah, I had to put it on worst figures of the year. Number 3, Make Toys Buster Stealth Wing from their Cross Dimensions line. Once again, not a terrible figure, but not as elegant of a transformation as we've seen in the past. Not as graceful in the articulation department as we have seen in the past. Not as interesting in the sculpt department as we have seen in the past. And further away from the representation of the character than we have ever seen in the past. Now, I know they released the white version later, but why bother? Make Toys is a tremendous company that has consistently released fantastic pieces throughout history. This one came at a point in time where they haven't released much, and due to that, seems like a major black eye on their current state of affairs. I am pulling for Make Toys. I hope that they come back swinging in 2020, but they're gonna need hooks and uppercuts, not hand slaps. My number 2 choice isn't really a terrible figure, but it's kind of terrible to their standard. I probably even recommended it in the video because it's not terrible across the board. And that is the Magic Square Hoist. Magic Square impresses me with their articulation, their engineering, their sculpt, their color palette, all of that stuff. And somehow with this thing, it feels like the B team got a hold of this and just never looked back. The engineering is clunky, the articulation is awkward, the color palette for the green seems wrong, the transformation is frustrating instead of mind-blowingly awesome, which is what it usually is. It came with kind of useless accessories. Like the whole package of this thing just seems like the ball wasn't anywhere near being over the plate for these guys. It's still kind of fine and will do its job on a shelf, but it's just not a well-done thing overall. But my number 1 choice is gonna be old Foot Patty Matty. This thing is dumb. It is without a doubt the dumbest looking masterpiece I've ever seen. If you like it, you win. But somehow, in my book, you still lost. What I think Masterpiece usually does extremely well, regardless of how I feel about the characters or the figures they produce, is they make it somehow feel like the character. This doesn't feel like Bumblebee at all to me. I feel like the thighs and lower legs do, but nothing about this seems like a masterpiece to me. The backpack doesn't look finished. I think there are aesthetic cues that are sacrificed in order to pull off articulation. I think in the past they've done this with a little bit of kibble, but on this one they do it with sculpt, and that's a problem. And of course the feet. Like this thing just looked like it stepped in 2 giant hamburgers, put those hamburgers in sort of 2 scuba diving flipper sets, and then thought, well, that's gonna be awkward, so then duct taped the flipper back around on itself, and it just looks absurd. There's nothing about this that feels like a masterpiece, to include the engineering, which here seems awkward and clumsy instead of elegant and graceful, which is what they usually do. This is not good, and it is the worst figure I feel like I've looked at this year. And I mean that. I know people seem to like it, and I would like to see how that plays out in time. I would like to see how this figure feels to people in 3 years. Because I think after the new toy joy kind of fades away, you'll begin to see it for what it really is, which is the worst figure of 2019. I mean, to me anyway. And that does it. That gets the kind of sour notes completely out of the way, and we can move on to more greener pastures. But, you know, I didn't buy most of those. So this year hasn't really been a bad year for Transformers for me in terms of quality. Quantity has been an issue because I haven't really picked up much. But quality, I mean, most of the stuff I've gotten this year has been really good. You know, even my disappointments have been still good figures, you know. So I think 2019 has been a pretty good year overall. Hasn't been a quantifiable year, especially for the Masterpiece collector. But like the Legend stuff has pretty much been great. And Chug is pretty much dead with the exception of MMC and I guess Planet X, maybe. But overall, yeah, I mean, even these figures aren't terrible that are on the list, you know, with the exception I can't stand that Bumblebee, but that's maybe I'm hung up on that. Let's move on to a brighter side of life. Let's move on to best figures of the year. And number 5 is Mastermind Creations Saltus. This Springer is a knockout figure. It's painted well, it's sculpted well, the engineering is fascinating, fun, intuitive, and enjoyable. The accessories are appropriate, it's sculpted beautifully, the hardware is there, it's just a well done thing. It would just be crazy to not include this on the list. And although he's not my Springer, I'm content with the Fans Toys option. It doesn't change the fact that this is one of the best figures that came out this year. Exceptionally well done. Number 4, MP44. It's gonna rub some people the wrong way because they love their transform elements, and I hear you, but the only thing that sucks about this thing is the price. It's beautiful. It's really well done. The engineering is fantastic. The materials are fantastic. The articulation is fantastic. The hardware is fantastic. The accessories are out of this world. They almost seem limitless. It's amazing. The only real beef I have with it is that the flight stand sucks. It is a beautiful representation of a cartoon Optimus Prime, and it is without a doubt the best one that's ever been done ever. Despite how much you may love another version, and of course it's subjective, but I'm here to tell you somehow, even being subjective, you're still wrong. This is perfect, by and large. It kind of checks everything about a masterpiece that you'd want. And when I say you, I'm kind of speaking generally because I'm not really into the super hyper-toon aesthetic. But if you are, there's not a better option. I said that in my review and I'm sticking to it. It is a masterfully done figure. Too expensive for me. It's not close enough to what I want to justify the price, but it doesn't change the fact of what it is. Number 3 is this beaut. Some people get upset with me because they say, well, this is not one figure, it's 5 figures and it turns into one. And no, you're right. And you can do whatever you want when you make a list, Mag, but right now I'm making mine and it's making number 3. Anyway, it's solid as a rock. It has some sophistication beyond the G1 cartoon aesthetic while maintaining a G1 cartoon inspiration. It's exactly what I'm chasing. I'm sure the painted one will look even better, but for my shelf sensibilities, etc., this is more than sufficient. It is a wonderfully done masterpiece. I hope it's not the last one that Zeta is able to do, but God bless them. This thing is fantastic. One of my personal favorites in my entire collection and definitely deserves a spot on this list for this year. Number 2, Flames Toys Tarn / Flames Toys Starsaber, to be fair. Now, I know this figure came out at the tail end of 2018, but I didn't get mine until 2019, and it is without a doubt one of the best figures I bought this year. And to be fair, it's better than most of the figures I bought overall, not just Transformers, but everything. It is amazing. It means a lot to me because of how I kind of got it, but it is amazing. It's breathtaking. It captures my eye every time I walk past it. The materials are fantastic. The paint is fantastic. Articulation, gimmicks, accessories, all of it, everything is done to the nines. An absolutely stunning and amazing piece, beautifully put together with only a few nitpicks along the way. You pay for it, but in contrast to MP44, I feel like this is worth the cost, in spite of no transformation engineering. The amount of engineering that's in this thing just to make it as good an action figure as it is breathtaking. Beautiful, beautiful piece that I'm very, very happy and fortunate and grateful to own. And the moment is upon us. The number 1 figure of the year, the numero uno. Any guesses? Any guesses? This bad boy. There's something about this thing. This thing is out of control. Not only did they take a robot that usually looks stupid, to be honest, in most representations because of that big box he's got on his head and the way that the kind of clunky, clumsy look of his whole body and demeanor, they took it and made it look cool, and I'm not sure how. The paint is up to the Fans Toys standard. The build is up to the Fans Toys standard. The articulation is up to the Fans Toys standard. The engineering is a bear, but it's up to the Fans Toys standard, and it actually exceeds it. What they're able to do with this and make this entire trailer and everything fold up on his back. It is spectacular. It is amazing. It is something that should go down in history as being one of the most surprising things that we've ever seen. We've never seen anything like this. It is a self-contained tractor trailer that folds up into a backpack. It's ridiculous. It's so good that my buddy Joe KW is like, I'm not sure I even want all the Stunticons, but I think I'm gonna get this one. It's the first time I've really noticed that they made a toy mass shift. This is one of those releases that will go down in history. This is one that people will look back on in 10 years like, man, you remember what they did with that one. An outstanding, outstanding, outstanding contribution. I just don't know what else to say about these three. And to be fair, the other two that I didn't buy, they're all really, really well done. They are a testament to how good Transformers can be when they are really done well, when they have the pride put in them, when they have the effort put in them, and when they have the love, care, and attention to detail put in them. These are the best transforming figures that I have come across, in my opinion, in 2019. But to be fair, if I were to do a list of ever, it'd be hard to take one of them off the list. I know where I'd start, but it wouldn't be an easy choice. So there they are. It's been a year. A lot of great releases this year. Most of them have been Legends class figures, but a lot of great larger scale figures as well. And I don't want to kind of pad the truth here. The truth is that there haven't been a lot of releases in the larger scale. The good news is, of the larger scale releases, there hasn't been many poor ones. That's the takeaway. So although it's less, it's a higher standard pretty much across the board. Look, I always take this opportunity to talk to you guys at the end. I want to thank you for all the support. I want to thank you for all the love. The Patreon folks, I want to thank more than they know, but the viewership as a whole, I really want to take a time and thank you guys. I'm grateful that you guys take time out of your day, watch my videos because you're interested in them, because you respect my opinion, whether you agree with it or not. Love is love. I'll be here in 2020, sitting down with you on Saturday, getting the dummies together twice a month, and hopefully forcing you to question a few things on Fridays. I've been doing this now for 5 or 6 years. In terms of the viewership, it always gets more rewarding. So thank you guys. Love you. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.